Welcome to this episode of the Profitable Home Services Podcast. This is a podcast where we dig deep into the profit and the cash flow leaks in your business. We're so glad you could join us today. Today, we're going to be speaking with Jeremy Lowe from Profit Rhino and from Service Fusion. Is that correct if I say both?
That's correct.
Okay. And he's going to be sharing some amazing information with us today. So welcome, Jeremy. I'm so glad you joined us for the show today.
Well, thank you, Diane. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit more about Jeremy. With his 40 years of HVAC experience under his belt, Jeremy speaks to thousands of business owners and managers about building profit in service departments. He started in the field as an HVAC technician and worked his way up to managing a contracting firm worth $14 million. He uses that storied background to teach contractors, publish articles, and speak at trade shows about how to improve their business. But his Pricing for Profit bootcamp is the best way to really understand what he offers and why it is important to grasp what profit really means. More than 1,000 contractors have taken this 2-day immersive course and come out of this boot camp with a firm understanding of their business. Though he still speaks nationally, Jeremy also serves as the Senior Director of Content and Training at Service Fusion. He manages and creates training materials for both employees and customers while still overseeing the Callahan Roach flat rate pricing database. With his experience with the industry leader in flat rate pricing models, he is an expert in both Callahan Roach's robust flat rate catalog and how to create the best flat rate services for contractors. When he's not working, Jeremy loves to relax by fishing on his boat and or traveling with his camera. Photography has been a passion since he was 8, so he is rarely without a camera or two. He also loves sampling the flavors of all the cities he travels to while meeting new people. And since mental health is incredibly important to him, Jeremy also volunteers to help those who suffer from mental health issues and trauma from suicide. Wow, that's a lot of stuff that you're involved in.
I try to stay busy.
Yeah,
Idle hands are the devil's work, my dad used to say.
That's right. I think you do a great job. And as I was reading the photography part, my husband laughs at me because I own multiple cameras. And at the minimum, there's always a phone in your pocket. You can grab something that way.
It's a nasty habit because when you buy one camera, you realize you just need the next model up, and it keeps going and going, never stops.
No. And he's always saying, but I thought you had one that worked well. He says, yeah, but this one's got a bigger zoom on it, or this one does this or that.
Yeah,
and
I've heard that so many times. How true.
So whenever we go somewhere, I have at least a couple cameras with me because I too love to capture, especially God's creation out there. There's just some amazing scenes that you can get if you've got something up and ready to shoot.
And you pay attention. I went to Vietnam a few years ago, and the local tour guides looked at me and looked at all the cameras I was carrying, and they just shook their heads. They just couldn't believe it.
So I was coming down the hill on my way to work a few weeks ago, and I'm looking at, I live way out in the country, so I have to come into town to go to work. And I was looking down the road and going, what is those two little blobs? Is that two little dogs or what's in the road? And when I finally got a little closer, it was a doe with two tiny twin fawns. And I didn't have my phone powered on, and I didn't have a camera with me. And I thought, what a picture, these two little fawns, and she's nosing them, trying to get them to either cross the road or not. And so I just stopped and let them have their time, but I was kicking myself that I didn't have a camera ready to be able to capture that, because that's not something I see very often. They weren't more than maybe a week old. They were tiny.
You always look for those kind of opportunities, especially with nature. It's not uncommon in Florida, where I used to live, to see deer grazing on the side of the road late at night. Made for some great photographic stops.
Yeah. And I think that bleeds over into the business world of being aware and paying attention. And not that we're taking pictures so much in the business world, but we're looking for opportunities and we're paying attention to what somebody else is doing, even if they're outside our industry, and looking at how can we use this idea or this concept? How can we bring it into our industry and use it as a way to increase our profits or to increase our cash flow, grow our business, build our team, become more efficient, those types of things.
Over the years, I've had the opportunity to teach outside of our industry, which has been very eye-opening. I taught some general contractors, framers, and masons. But a few years ago, I started teaching in the Pet Boarding Association.
Wow.
And you would wonder what that has to do with heating and air conditioning. But it became very obvious the more time I spent working with those folks that service is service is service.
Mhm.
If you provide a service, something that is an expirable commodity, which time is obviously an expirable commodity. So is a kennel. If you do not fill it with an animal, it's an expirable commodity. Then the basic underpinnings of how you run your business are almost identical across these industries. So what we teach in these types of business classes is the basic foundational way that successful companies run if they provide services. Different than a retail organization. But again, it's amazing how much this spreads across all of the trades and services, from home cleaning to dog boarding and grooming. It's mind-boggling, but it comes down to basic good business practices.
Something that I was paying attention to in your bio is your flat rate book. I know how important that is because it's a big pain in the neck to have to go through and manually update your pricing. And I think back during COVID, prior to that, I think so many of my guys would mention that they would update their pricing maybe twice a year. But then COVID hit and prices were jumping weekly, almost daily. And how hard that was to stay up on those pricing so that they weren't losing money on their jobs. And I know those that had subscribed to a service that's a flat rate service, that was being done for them. And they weren't having to manually stop and do it. So talk to me a little bit about your flat rate book.
Well, it's actually the way I went to work for Callahan Roach 23 years ago. Was I bought their product back in the early 90s in my contracting firm, fell in love with the concept of flat rate pricing. Of course, recent survey said 92% of buyers want an upfront or menu-driven price. So it makes good sense. And so this product has been developed out over 30 plus years of proprietary feedback from contractors. Thousands of invoices came back over the years with clerical people saying, okay, it took this long to install a flapper in a toilet, this long to install a motor, etc. And this was assimilated in a large database. Connections are made with distributors and manufacturers. And so we have a full-time team here that continues to take this information, adjust pricing, bring in parts that are new, and remove parts that are obsoleted so that we keep it up to date. And right now we maintain a database of about 55,000 tasks across the three major trades: plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. And it's been very successful with contractors. But just to go back to something you said about contractors raising their rates twice a year, my hat's off to them, because we did a survey pre-COVID and we surveyed over 800 contractors and found the average rate increase was once every 38 months.
Wow.
During COVID, we had somebody come to us to update their pricing that had not updated their pricing since 2006.
Oh my goodness.
And one of the reasons is that this happens, Diane, is because a company that is making profit does not think about their service department as a separate entity. When I came into the business, the gentleman that trained me said, service is a necessary evil. I know I don't make any money at it, but I can't have the rest of my installs without a service department. And so if companies grow and they make profit, what they do not do is go back and make sure that they're breaking even on service and making the profit they want. Mm-hmm. The only time they begin to worry about it is when their overall company profit suffers. Then they begin to dig into their financials. And at that point, they've given up tens of thousands of dollars in profit and revenue over the years simply because they didn't keep up with prices.
And I'm going to interject that tens of thousands is probably hundreds of thousands
Oh, without a
over the
doubt.
years. Yes. Because I see that a lot when I'm working with my coaching clients, that if they are not staying on top of those price increases from their vendors and increases in employee benefits and increases in your overhead and increases all around, it all filters down to that service department as well as your installers. But your service department seems to get a big hit on there. And that can actually become a profit leak. And they don't even know it. Because huge profit leak. And that's one of those areas that we call those a hidden profit leak. It's not sitting on your P&L saying, hey, pay attention to me. It's hidden. It's dumped in your cost of goods sold, and they can't see that money's leaking out. It's a quiet, hidden, very, very, don't draw any attention to me type of a profit leak in a business.
When I finally understood how to make a profit in a service department was when I went to a similar class to what I now teach and learned how to break apart the revenue, which is kind of obvious. Most people do that in QuickBooks already. But the real art is understanding how to break apart the overhead expenses to the correct department. Yes. And we would look at a company and we'd be showing a 65% gross margin in service and maybe a 40% gross margin in replacement. And you would think, logically, that service is making a lot of money. But what people fail to realize is labor is the primary cost of overhead. Labor drives overhead. It takes people to manage people. It takes material to make people do their jobs effectively. And so as a result, there's a lot of inefficiency in service departments. And when you break apart the overhead correctly, assign it to the department that really generated it, you will oftentimes find that 65% gross margin service department is losing 10 or 12% net. The only reason you're not seeing it is because you're offsetting it with your replacement division that's making a 20% net. And so had you fixed the service department correctly, you would have a company operating in the high double digits, even in the 20s, which is where the company that I left, we had managed to take it within a period of 3 years, simply by understanding that leakage that you're referring to, which is a combination of efficiency and in most cases, incorrect service labor rates, because we base it on what we think the industry will support, or what I like to call, yellow page pricing. Back in the old days, we'd open the yellow pages and call everybody in the area that did the work we did, and we'd pick a place to be in that group. And that has nothing to do with the reality of what it cost us to run our business. And so as a result, we oftentimes leave money laying on the table. In some cases, we're not even meeting our overhead. We are just basically running a department to keep people busy. And that's a shame, because it doesn't have to be that way if you get a good, sound financial education.
And I know that knowing and understanding your numbers is a very scary thought to most home service trade business owners. They're great at their trade. They're amazing HVAC or a plumber or an electrician, or maybe it's a roofer or a landscape, whatever they might be. They're amazing at that. But when you set them down and you start handing them numbers, you get the deer in the headlights look. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I'm not comfortable here. And so I think in being willing to be uncomfortable to get comfortable with your numbers is a deal breaker.
Yeah, I do one test in class, which is just a basic mathematical calculation. We talk about markup versus margin. If you want to make a profit margin of X, what is the mathematical calculation? And in 20 years of teaching this class, 70% of the students get it wrong. Which means when we say mark this up, that's one thing, but make a 40% margin on something, and the answer they will almost always give ends up with a 29% margin. So just that one thing alone of understanding the difference between calculating markup and calculating margin and the impact it has on your business can be the difference between being profitable or not. So it's scary. You don't like to get into something you think the CPA should be doing. But the fact of the matter is you need to tell your CPA how to do their job, because they're the tax people, you're the business owner, and you're working in a very specialized industry that has special labor requirements. You monitor things differently with key performance indicators and metrics and things of that nature. And if you're not doing that, then you spend a lot of time kind of beating your head against the wall. You may be profitable, but nowhere near what you could be. And you're not building wealth, which is really what you want. You want to build something of tangible value so that when you go to retire, you can sell it, or perhaps inherit it down to your children, if you want to do that.
And I think they don't always realize that profit is the lifeblood of their business. You know, everybody says sales is the lifeblood of your business. I say no, it's your profit and your cash flow. If you don't have those, you can sell yourself from here to eternity, but if you don't have profit and cash flow, your business will end up closing, even if you've got millions of dollars in sales.
Yeah, there's a mantra, cash is king in service. And one of the companies I took over in my career was very positive on cash flow. They were a large new construction organization. But the first hiccup they hit with that cash flow, they were in serious trouble because there was no true profit. It was in the low single digits, and they couldn't support with that type of profit the organization if they had a hiccup in their cash flow. So you can literally run a company that's on the verge of bankruptcy, and as long as you've got that cash flow, you think things are good because you got a small net profit. Hey, I got $150,000 in the bank. I'm good to go. And that one job goes south, or that one large bill doesn't get paid, and all of a sudden you're scrambling to open a line of credit. So what you said is extremely true. It is all about cash flow and being able to maintain a certain net profit and project out how much more you need above and beyond the profit to grow your business, invest for the tangible assets that you need, and have that money set aside so that you don't go digging into the profit, which is how you pay yourself.
Right. I was working with a business recently who takes in decent sized deposits up front on their jobs. They do large type jobs. And because of those deposits that they collect, they had cash in the bank. But in reality, their P&L had a loss. And so I had to have the conversation with them of telling them, you guys, we've got to back off on spending. We got to get in here and find out how you're spending money and things like that. We need to make some really tough decisions because you're losing money. And they came back with, well, I've got all this money in the bank. I says, but technically it doesn't belong to you. You haven't started the job yet. It technically belongs to your customer still. But they had that fallacy of there's cash in the bank, everything's good.
I see over your shoulder on the screen, you have a book called Profit First. There was a gentleman many, many years ago in our industry by the name of Tom Grandy. He did a similar boot camp to what we do. And he made a statement one day, and it's very profound. He said, every dollar in a budget gets spent. And the way he explained it is, he said, if you go to college, you live on ramen noodles, perhaps. But that's because you use every dollar that's in your budget. So if a contractor sees money in the bank, sometimes they get the impression things are good because there's money in the bank. So they have to get in this mindset of setting aside profit, being able to understand a budget, and being able to work on monitoring what they're doing with cash flow, monitoring their key performance indicators. I kind of liken it to steering a boat in the water. If you let go of the wheel, it goes in circles. If you do not keep your hand on the wheel of your organization and know exactly when to make some corrections, you're going to get way out of whack from the course you're trying to steer the boat or steer your organization. And part of that comes with contractors waiting until 2 months down the road to get their P&L for the preceding month. Or in some cases, I've heard this, they get their P&Ls at the end of the year when they pay their taxes. Well, it's too late to do anything. So, a lot of it comes from just understanding the importance of those financial documents and being able to manipulate cash flow to match expenses so that you don't get in the situation you just described.
And that's why I love Profit First. And I am a mastery level, certified Profit First professional, because I love the system that is behind Profit First. And we're able to pull that money aside. So they have the money to pay their income tax, and they've got that profit protected so they can have a profit distribution. And we've put money away for the next truck or van that they need to purchase. They don't have to go get a loan for it. They've got at least some, if not all of it, sitting in an account ready to roll. And we've got an emergency fund set up, which will tide them through a bad period in the economy or something along those lines. So we love implementing Profit First into a business and making it way more successful than it would be otherwise.
Now, I'm going to say one bad thing about Profit First. It only works if there's a profit. And so it is very important. It's imperative. It should be the mission of any organization to understand their business financially, become a student of the financial side of your business. Don't leave it up to the QuickBooks accounting system. Don't leave it up to your accountant. If you're a CEO, you need to understand what a profit and loss statement really means, what a balance sheet means, how a balance sheet impacts your ability to get a loan. You need to understand some very common financial ratios as far as your liquidity, your assets, receivable rolls, things like this. Then when you have that profit, when you've priced correctly, you have the profit, then the Profit First is probably the best methodology for ensuring that you have profit. Otherwise, like Tom said, if it's $1 in the budget, it's going to get consumed.
And even if it's not in the budget, it's going to get consumed.
That's
because it's in
true.
the bank account.
Correct. And then you wonder what you're going to pay your bills with.
Right. Yes. Yes. So what's the number one problem that home service companies have that you see in how they're trying to obtain better profits?
Well, it goes to everything we've been saying. It's simply understanding the financial side. And you've said this several times, and I say it. We come from trucks. We know how to fix things. We're great at analytical things, but we tend to get too enmeshed to pay attention to the finances. There's money to cover the checks. I'm good to go. At the end of the year, hey, I made 6%. I'm great. But the fact of the matter is, if we priced our products and services correctly, if we understood how to manage efficiency better, because that, again, labor drives almost all overhead in a company. If we can do those things, then we're going to be better as an organization. And that's where the majority of contractors have to take the time to get an education in that. And that requires going to classes, getting training, reading, signing up for SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, which is a free program that lets you mentor with someone who has done it. And these type of things are a necessity if you really want to take your business to the next level. Otherwise, you struggle all the time. You make profit, but it's nowhere near what this industry can do.
I love it when I see home service businesses with a 10 to 15% net profit instead of 1 or 2 or 3 like I usually see. Because that tells me that those particular owners have absorbed the lessons. They've been listening, they've been paying attention, they've been fine-tuning, they've been looking at efficiency, they've got their systems are now in place, and you can see it in that net profit bottom line.
Yeah, 80% of the profit in our industry is made with less than 20% of the contractors. And that's a staggering number, but there are contractors out there edging over 20% net profit in their organizations. Service is a primary driving force of that profit, because service can be extremely profitable if it's correctly priced and correctly managed. And again, there's no reason that any contractor should settle for anything less than teens or higher for net profit. Otherwise, you're working for a job. And you might as well, a lot of stress to do it.
So you might as well go work for somebody else where you can check out at 5 o'clock and go home.
Exactly. Right.
Because I know so many of my contractors work long hours. They're working 70, 80-hour weeks all the time and not realizing the profit that they could and should be doing because they're so busy being busy that they're
Yeah.
not able to step back and take that look. We call that having some CEO time.
Hmm.
Step back and take a look at your business and find out what's going on.
Yeah, there's an old adage, you've got to make time to work on your business, not in your business.
Mhm.
And part of that working on your business is things like education, uh, trade shows, attending and listening to different contractors. You learn a lot from your competition. You might have to go out of your market to meet those people. And so the trade shows like Service World or ASHRAE or things like that are a great place to connect, to get an education. And then, use local resources. You have distributors, OEMs that all offer training. And then you have large organizations such as ourselves, both of us, that offer some type of training or consulting. And you should never be ashamed to ask for help when running your business, because if you run it the same way you've always done, you're going to get the same results.
Mhm.
And there's no
And-
reason for that.
And then we all know too that what got you to where the point you are today is not going to get you to that next threshold. Whether you're trying to top $1 million for the first time, well, the skills that got you there is not going to get you to 10 million
Mhm.
or 25 million. It takes a different skill set to hit each of those different parameters as you're growing your business.
The government census, the last census report said that let me think if I make sure, 30% of all service businesses go out of business the first year, and less than 29% are open in year 10. So if you've got to 10 years and you're still profitable, and by profitable, I mean more than just single digit, because that to me is a minimum, then you're pretty lucky. Or you've gone and got an education and you've learned how to do the things you need to do. It's not a mystery. I mean, when I started to learn myself, I thought there was some big secret to doing this, and I found out no, it's not a secret. There's a lot of information. It's just you have to aggressively go find it and learn it. Then you got to put it into play.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And this is just so important that that we stop and take the time to absorb what's out there, especially in the age that we live in now. I mean, there's so much on YouTube. There's so many podcasts out there. There's business coaches. There's no reason for a service business owner to not be able to absorb this information compared to when you and I were growing up and we were limited to maybe a SCORE office or an SBDC, Small Business Development Center. The internet wasn't out there and active like it is now. And so it was a lot harder to find that information and go after it.
Yeah. Over the last several years, and I'll say this about the internet, it can be a great source of information. It can also be a great source of disinformation.
Yes.
I've read numerous business articles where, as a consultant, I scratch my head and I go, who wrote this? I think the concepts sometimes are sound, but the advice of how to get there in some cases is very dangerous. I recently read an article about how to set your pricing. And it was basically saying, call your competition.
Oh, no.
And it was in a large publication. It wasn't some obscure blog article. And it kind of scratched my head and made me wonder, how contractors, they're getting all this different information, assimilate it, and then decide what is right. And the best way is to go with what's been proven. And what's been proven is understand your financials, set the correct rate, manage your efficiency. There are 4 things you can change in your business by 1% and impact your profit dollars by over 80%. And it's been proven time and time again with the large successful companies. You monitor these certain things, you keep them in adjustments, and you grow your business. So I laughingly say this joke in class. I say, you know what Abraham Lincoln said about the internet? He said, if it's on the internet, it must be true. I've read that on the internet, obviously.
Yeah,
So,
obviously.
the point is you can trust the internet to a certain point, but you still need to go back to your industry peers and your industry associations that have done it and proven it effective to get the ultimate set of information.
Well, this has been great. Thank you for sharing some of this. I have another question for you is, how does a company know what to charge for their services?
Well, this comes down to having your break even. You can't sell a gallon of milk and make a profit if you don't know what the gallon of milk costs. So service costs more than just the hourly rate of the technician. And it isn't something we guess at. There's actually mathematical calculations you can do to determine exactly, based on the current efficiency of your service technicians, what you need to charge per billable hour to recoup all of your expenses for the 2,080 hours you pay your employee, plus all of your overhead, fixed and variable expenses. And then onto that, you add the profit margin that you want. And on top of that, you can add for what's called asset recovery, or basically set aside money for things like trucks or roofs or whatever else. So it starts with understanding how to break the company apart, getting service as its own entity, its own overhead, and then determining the break even, which is really the holy grail that you build a profitable service price on.
And so all that's going to come right back down to know your numbers.
Yeah, and it comes down to taking the time to get an education instead of just working all the time in the business.
Yeah. So now that we've convinced all these home service businesses they need to check their pricing, pay attention to what it's really costing them, we're going to start seeing some increased profits out there.
We should, if they're doing it correctly. It's not just a matter of raising rates. You may raise your rate $5 or $10 and still not be at the right rate. And so, I've said this in class. Oftentimes I've asked for a show of hands of how many people can raise their rate by $1. And in 20 plus years of classes, I've had maybe 2 contractors out of thousands that didn't put their hand up. And so all the rest that put their hand up, I'll say, what about $2? And most hands will stay up. 3, most hands. 4 or 5, you get some dropping down. And I'll go back and I'll say, you're putting your hands up, you can get $1 or $2 more. My question to you is simple. Why haven't you? What prevents you from raising your rates? And most of it is between our ears. We tell ourselves we can't charge more because we let customers badger us because they don't want to pay what we have to charge to be profitable and run a service department. So again, it goes back to understanding what it costs you to run your business, getting that education.
And I think if our service departments, as well as our installers, but especially our service departments, if they're building a relationship with those customers, it makes it easier to get the price increases to come across, because the customer knows they trust your company. You're going to show up and you're going to get that job done right. You're not going to have to come back 2 or 3 or 4 times because you messed up each time. They know that your people are going to be courteous. They're going to be respectful when they show up. And as you come across with that type of a company, and compared to just some schmuck in a truck that pulls into their driveway, you can command those prices a lot easier and get less pushback.
Yeah, I've been in markets where I've seen contractors on the lowest end of the scale and on the highest, almost what some might call absurd end of the scale. And these high-priced contractors are very busy. And it's funny because sometimes the customers will tell you right up front, well, I know so-and-so is the highest price in the area. And you say, well, why do you use them? They say, because they do the best job. Yes. They leave my house cleaner than when they got there. They step up when something's wrong. They don't question it. They just ask you the simple question, what do you want? And then they take care of it. And that might sound like a lot, but if you're doing that, you can charge the higher premiums and the good customers will pay it. And the fact of the matter is, if a customer is going to badger us over charging $100 or $150 an hour, we may need to find other customers, or we're never going to be profitable as we want to be.
Yes, it's nice when you can work with customers who appreciate you and appreciate what you do and see the value in what you do, as opposed to the price shoppers. The price shoppers, let your competitors have those guys.
Yep,
And you go after the good ones, the ones who just appreciate you and love you, and they call you repeatedly for the work that they need done because they know, love, and trust you. And the others, let somebody else have them. You don't have to have everybody. There's so many homeowners and businesses out there that need your services that you don't have to be all things to all people.
that's correct. Yeah, in fact, I'm actually doing a discourse at Service World in October in Phoenix on that exact concept of why contractors don't raise the rates. What's the mind block? What's the problem? And a lot of it boils down to we just have to deliver a knock your socks off service mentality, create what Ken Blanchard called raving fans.
Yes.
And if we do that, people are more than happy to pay us. You know, some people will drive $100,000 cars and not bat an eye because to them it's worth it.
Mhm.
So we just have to make our services work.
One of my HVAC clients was telling me, I think it was last summer, that they had instituted a new program in their service department, and they did it during a slower time of the year, where they just reached out to all their customers and offered to come by and change the batteries in anything in their home. So they went out there with this nice array of batteries, and they changed the TV remote and obviously their smoke detectors, and just the fact that we're not here to sell you anything. We're just here to help you. And they said, especially their older clients really appreciated that. And that small little bit of, yeah, we spent maybe, 10 or 20 bucks per person on some batteries, but the goodwill that bought them. And so they were going to make that an annual part of their company. It was during their slower times. They would send their guys out there to do that type of thing. And I thought, what an out of the box concept. When's the last time somebody just called to say, hey, I'm not here to sell you anything. I just want to check in on you and see if we could come by and replace your batteries for you.
Yeah, I've heard of similar things like with electricians who will offer, if you have a bulb and you call us for any service, we'll change any bulb in your house. Because some people don't want to get up on a ladder. Same thing with filters, things of that nature. I ran into a plumber a few years ago who offered basic service, and with the basic service in the house, he changed all the flappers, provided they were standard flappers. And I said, well, how do you afford to do that? And then he told me what he was charging an hour and what he was getting on average service ticket revenue. He says, I'll throw in $6, $8, $10 in flappers that take me 2 minutes to change all day long if it generates the customer loyalty and the revenue.
And that is the difference between a service business up in that top 20% versus everybody else. Is they're willing to go that extra step, and that is reflected in their pricing.
Correct. Yeah. You cannot just raise your pricing without raising the experience for the customer, raising the perceived value, because that's what happens is a consumer has an expectation that's at a certain point. And when we come and we deliver service, we have to be beyond that expectation, because if we are, then the price becomes less of a focus. But if we don't even hit the expectation, and some of them are quite frankly unrealistic, but if we don't hit it or come close, then the only other thing the customer can focus on is the price.
Right. So let's give them a reason not to focus on the price.
Exactly.
And in the process, here we go again, increase that profits and your cash flow in your business, because it all trickles down.
That's correct.
So here's a little question I've been asking each of my podcast guests is, what is the most unique profit leak that you've seen as you've been working with home service businesses over the years?
Wow. I don't even know where to start that list.
Share a few of them then.
Yeah, I think it would still typically be service departments, and it would be the unapplied labor. I think the one thing that contractors don't understand is just how expensive it is to bring service techs in for weekly meetings, to pick up parts every morning. Those two little things right there can have a huge impact on profitability, because not only are you not running service calls, but your efficiency of billable hours gets way out of whack. So it's those little type of things that you've got to come up with some kind of out of the box thinking, and there are plenty of ways to deal with that, so that you spend less time doing those and more time in front of the customer. Windshield time and office time is not profit time.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you again for sharing so much wisdom and insight with us today. I appreciate you being on our program.
Appreciate it.
Yes. If listeners want to learn more about you and the businesses that you're running, how can they get in contact with you?
Well, they can reach out to either Service Fusion or Profit Rhino, or they can email direct to me at education@servicefusion.com. And we do run a 2-day business boot camp, the same camp that we've been running for 20 years, based here in Arlington, Texas. So always have the doors open. Love to have people come through. I've met some wonderful people in my career over the years and seen so many of them go on to be successful, even to retire, even beating me out of the trade. So it's available, and certainly love to talk to people, anything we can do to help contractors, which is really one of our business missions.
Well, very good. Thank you again for that. And thank you again for sharing such great information and being a real giver out in the industry.
Diane, I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're going to say that's a wrap for this episode of the Profitable Home Services Podcast. Remember, it's not how much money you make, it's how much you keep. That top line revenue can be so deceiving. We're looking all about what is that net bottom line profit. If you'd like to get a free digital copy of my book, Your Path to Profits, and you can see that right above my head back there, head on over to yourpathtoprofitbooks.com. and we'll be happy to give you a free digital copy of that book. Thank you again for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you on our next one.